member for Macquarie. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the National Broadband Network Companies Amendment Commitment to Public Ownership Bill of 2024. And I've been in the House for most of the member for Macquarie's speech, and I must say large parts of her speech I really agree with. The NBN, the importance of it, it's very important for infrastructure, its importance in emergencies, the fact that we need to, quote, secure reliable technology, particularly in storm-prone communities. I am really glad that the Minister for Communications and the member for Macquarie have been able to get fibre to the premises within your electorate. Perhaps a member for Macquarie would be able to explain to me why the Minister for Communications won't assist me in my electorate of Hughes to get fibre to the premises in the suburb of Bundeena. This is a suburb which is far more isolated than the Blue Mountains. I note the interjections over there. Could it be that assistance was given from the minister to those on that side of the chamber, with the same assistance has not been provided on this side of the chamber? And as I hear more interjections, I will read directly from a letter that the minister wrote back to me, refusing my community, but she's obviously been very helpful for communities on your side of the chamber. So, Deputy Speaker, I will return to the issue of Bundeena, and I am appreciating these interjections because I'd be very interested to hear whether or not other members on that side have been given the NBN upgrades that have not been afforded to those in my electorate. So the purpose of this bill, the stated purpose of this bill when this was introduced, Deputy Speaker—
The member for Hughes has the call.
The stated purpose from the Minister for Communications was that this will amend original Labor legislation to remove conditions enabling a future government to privatise NBN. The bill provides certainty to stakeholders, including broadband consumers, the wider telecommunications industry, broadband retailers and NBN Co, that the Commonwealth will continue to retain ownership of NBN Co. Well, Deputy Speaker, unless I've missed something over the last few weeks, there has been no conversation about NBN, about changing the public ownership, except from those on that side of the chamber. And why is this? This is legislation that is in fact amending the government's previous legislation. So I'll just by way of background, Deputy Speaker, the Rudd Labor government, we all remember that Labor government, announced the establishment of a new NBN Co to build and operate a new fast national broadband network. And in that, when the legislation was introduced, it was anticipated that the government would be the NBN Co's major shareholder, but there would also be significant private investment in the company. Quote, the government will make an initial investment in the company, but intends to sell down its interest in the company within 5 years after the network is built and fully operational, consistent with market conditions and national identity security considerations. Then we have the introduction of the NBN Companies Bill 2011, passed in March 2011, and in the second reading speech, the then Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, who is, I believe, the current Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, stated, the first bill in the package, the NBN Companies Bill, also sets out, and this is important, Deputy Speaker, and I quote, arrangements for the eventual sale of the Commonwealth stake in the company once the NBN rollout is complete, including provisions for independent and parliamentary reviews prior to any privatisation, and for the Parliament to have the final say on the sale. As such, the bill deals with arrangements for both today and into the future. And that is a direct quote, Deputy Speaker, from the then Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, who now holds the highest political office in the land. The Then, if we come to the actual nature of NBN Co, it's an unlisted public company limited by shares incorporated under the Corporations Act and is a Commonwealth company for the purposes of various other acts. It was established in 2009 as a government business enterprise by the federal government, which is its sole shareholder. So if we now come to 2022, Deputy Speaker, as I've said before, this bill is nothing but a sad stunt. This is designed to create confected debate that somehow those on our side, or perhaps their friends in the Greens, somewhere, somebody has some intention to sell off the NBN. There is no intention on our side. Nobody's talking about changing the ownership of the NBN, not the Coalition and not anyone else that I've heard in this place. This is just a shambolic attempt by a government that is really frightened to address the real issues that are affecting Australians, which is cost of living. And also in my electorate, there are plenty of Australians very upset with the NBN service that is being delivered under this Communications Minister, under this government, and even more upset. No, I'd ask the honourable member, you are very welcome to come to Bundeena, as I have done, seen the sort of internet coverage that they have down there, made representations to the minister, who was— I'll quote that in a minute. Look, Labor has done this before, Deputy Speaker. They are the party of Mediscare. Now it's nothing but NBN scare. This is done to simply distract from the issues that they know. They've been back in their electorates for weeks, those on that side. Their constituents are telling them exactly the same thing that our constituents are telling us. They are not happy with this government. This government is not addressing their cost of living issues. They are a party known for making up fake election campaigns. So, Deputy Speaker, when we see a government that's getting hammered on all fronts, what happens? Oh, let's quickly— I wonder how this transpired in the party room. Hey, Bing, I've got a really good idea today. Let's pretend that the Coalition are going to sell off the NBN. Oh, yes, that sounds like a really good idea. So at a time when Australians are desperate for help with cost of living crisis, this Labor Party is more focused on political games than fixing the problems facing everyday families. We know it on our side, and my electorate knows it, and your electorates know it as well. They are now seeing it. They're seeing it. They are seeing what we have seen sitting here for 2.5 years. Probably a government that will go down as the worst government in history. My parents, who are old enough to remember Whitlam, always said to me, "We'll never see a government worse than Whitlam." Then we had Rudd. We'll never see a government worse than Rudd. We are now seeing a government far worse than either of those two former failed Labor governments. And, Deputy Speaker, I just want to touch on what has happened with the NBN under this minister and under the watch of this Prime Minister. There's been a major decline in the NBN. They have essentially hammered Australians with massive NBN price increases. We've seen 6 million families smashed by NBN prices of up to 14% since October last year. 14%. And over the same time period, the NBN's brownfields business, meaning existing homes, has lost almost 100,000 customers. So how on earth can this be lauded as some great success of the Prime Minister and the Minister for Communications? It's not. This is just a lame stunt from a lame government. And they could, instead— the Minister for Communications particularly, and the Prime Minister, could be talking about an issue that is of concern in the community, which is the need for gambling advertising reform. I asked the question 3 weeks ago to the Minister for Communications, and she couldn't answer it. My friend, the member for Casey, also Menzies, apologies, Deputy Speaker, also asked the question. We were the two from this side that were on that inquiry. It was chaired by the former member for Dunkley, Peter Murphy, And at the time, there were commitments made. After Ms Murphy passed away, there were commitments made from a whole lot of us that we would continue with the work that was done on that inquiry. And what has happened since? It was presented to the minister in June 2023. Where is it? She still can't answer questions. The minister cannot answer questions in question time as to when she's going to whether she's going to adopt the recommendations and when. In 1996, Deputy Speaker, John Howard had been admitted for a couple of weeks and we had the tragic massacre down in Port Arthur. John Howard at the time had to stare down members of his own party, members of his coalition party and a lot of the Liberal Party's base because he knew in his heart that Australia needed gun reform. That changed the nature of Australia. Why is it then that full bipartisan support, thank you, Minister, full bipartisan support, and that report that was given to the minister had bipartisan support. It was unanimous. Yes? So then the Prime Minister, I would suggest that the Prime Minister can take something from the John Howard playbook and actually think, I'm going to act in the nation's interests here. I'm going to act in the nation's interest and not those in the interests of some of his friends and allies, because he has missed an opportunity to demonstrate strong leadership, moral courage and political conviction on a national social and health epidemic. Ms Murphy's husband has asked what is going on. Labor, what are you doing about this report? The Reverend Tim Costello has been asking about it. Anna Bardsley contacted the Prime Minister 3 weeks ago and said, I am coming to Canberra this week because I need to speak to the Prime Minister about gambling reform and about gambling harm. She couldn't get an audience with the Prime Minister, but she got an audience with me, and the stories from her and her colleagues about the devastation of gambling harm on them, on their families, was heartbreaking. Women who have served time in prison for theft to simply feed their gambling habits. Another spoke about first gambling at the age of 7, as well as the social impacts online gambling has had on his Asian Australian community. Australians love a punt, Deputy Speaker. Today is Melbourne Cup Day. Most Australians gamble responsibly. They do it with friends. They do it as a social activity. They gamble with money they know that they can afford to lose. That is fine, but there are, for a number of Australians, gambling harm causes a massive problem for them. Bundeena. I've been asked about Bundeena from somebody over on that side. I went to the minister. After April, I went to the minister and said, can you please assist this community of mine? They need fibre to the premises or fibre to the curb. Minister wrote back to me, and I quote, NBN Co has advised that there have never been any plans to provide fibre to the curb services to Bundeena. However, parts of Bundeena have been included in the project to eventually deliver fibre to the premises upgrades. That was supposed to have occurred in 2023. The minister has now changed the date to 2025 and then indicated at the end of the letter, unfortunately, this process is lengthy and has significantly delayed the delivery of upgrades to the Bundeena area. Deputy Speaker, nobody on this side is talking about privatising or selling off NBN.
Sorry, in accordance with Standing Order 43, the debate will be resumed at a later hour and the member will have permission to continue.
Authorised anywhere, Liberal Party Sutherland.